The first 3 weeks of the eruption here in Hawaii, crazy things would happen in the middle of the night. A new fissure would open up and it would threaten a new neighborhood. Thousands of people were evacuated from their homes. I started the Hawaii Tracker Facebook group to help people understand what's going on and get their questions answered.
Hey, how's it going? We're live. This is Fissure 20.
We had hundreds of people all throughout the neighborhoods sending in videos, articles, and images. We spend a lot of time making sure the accurate information gets out.
This is live. There's still lava moving.
They weren't just sharing a story, they were helping their neighbor. If a family was being evacuated, my group would just jump in and help out. So it was huge. They were watching out for each other.
Hello everybody, thank you for coming. Thank you for the support from everybody.
As we go through this, we're growing closer together as a community. When tragedies like this strike, you really realize how much you need each other.
Aloha everyone, I'm Geologist Philip Ong, here with Mr. Dane DuPont of HawaiiTracker.com, bringing you guys another Hawaiian volcano tracker update, and we'll touch on Samoa again today. Today's Thursday, September 22nd, 2022. We're 1 week away from the 1 year anniversary of this eruption, Dane. But this past week, she gave us another surprise. The volcano had a sagging of that upper crust, a bunch of lava broke out on top. It's technically all still the same eruption, but we did have a little hiccup, or we'll find different ways to describe this that maybe more appropriate coming up. How was your past week here?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we went live right as this thing was going on a couple days ago to cover the After Dark in the Park presentation. If you guys missed that, that's up on the channel. Pretty interesting presentation there about different artists. But anyways, yeah, I remember checking the cameras just, to find some material for the in-between times, and saw the sagging and everything going on right then, type of thing. So that was interesting, and seemed everything kind of stabilized afterwards. I remember you went up with 2 pineapples to the Waldron's Ledge lookout, and were able to get some good footage up there of that new activity, right? We've been, the last couple months, been in this holding pattern where everything's pretty steady, and now we have something, happening again.
Yeah, maybe even the last 6 months or so, really, right? It's been kind of
really
steady or so. Yeah, And yeah, it's something that we'll dig into and all the little details here. And so we have a lot to share with you guys today. I probably better get into it here, huh, Dane? Anything else?
We'll be going all night. Yeah, go ahead. Take it off. Let's go.
All right. So here we go. We'll start off with our weekly summary by sharing this compilation that Dane has of the actual event as it occurred just in the daylight hours before sunset on Tuesday afternoon here. And crater floor is sagging in all these different views. We'll break it down so you can see them more easily one at a time as well. But that's the overall pattern. Everything restricted within this upper summit crater. And I should say that that means that no rift zone activity, no sign of anything migrating anywhere else, and there's no increased hazard to people, most importantly, right? Because of this. That's really where we're going with this. So it's still a curiosity. There's not a whole lot to worry about, but it's really interesting to think about what the volcano is actually doing. So that's what we'll dig into a little bit here. All right, so you guys have been seeing that cycle through. I'll just move on to look at them one at a time. But to set the scene here, we're going to start with this aerial video from the USGS that was released last week. Actually, it's capturing the state of the volcano before this collapse actually happened. So if you guys haven't joined us for a while or need a little recap review, here is our situation. Lava's been filling this collapse pit from 2018, and it's been overspilling on downdrop block ledges. There's one there, and there's one back over here in this corner as well. And looks like it might spill over in that direction and up over here as well soon. But the main lava lake is restricted to a small area right in there. The west vent with all this gas putting out is where the lava is coming up underneath the crust, but most of the lava stays underneath the crust and oozes up around the perimeter of this discolored whitish area all around in there. So that's the scene beforehand. And we'll just keep it rolling here and share. This is a view from the KW camera on Tuesday evening to start off. And you see there is that persistent lava lake right in there. The area that we've previously termed the West Vent Pond. That has been dark for a while, seems to have relit, so it seems like the lava pushed out through there as well as this western and southwestern margin of this West Vent cone complex, which is something that's changed for a while that we documented in the earlier first 6 months of the eruption there. So all lava is oozing out from this backside over here. It's still active in the main lake, and it's also oozing out along this northern, kind of from the northwest all the way to the northeast margin of the lava lake as well. So that was a view in the evening, and in the next sunrise, you can see another image pulled out by Dane here, that main active lava lake, and that ooze up flow that was there in that southwest corner is still large and persistent at that point in time. So we'll look at that a little more closely. Start off here by showing you guys this full last week of the KW camera. And this is that camera on that northwest rim, or that western rim of the caldera. So north that direction there. There's our main lake, and you'll see that kind of ooze up, be apparent as the nighttime flips around here in the end of this animation before it loops around. So here we are going through it again. And here's the 20th right now. So here comes the ooze ups there in the daytime, at nighttime, and you can see at nighttime it persists a little bit, not only in the southwest, but also in this northern quadrant as well. So since it is moving so fast there, let me push it through here, and we're actually just going to clip from the beginning of that animation to today, so you can maybe more easily see just that one phase of activity there. And what I'm going to do is zoom into this so we can see some different areas. The most activity is occurring here in this southwest corner. So here's our active lava lake, and you can see in this earlier frame, perhaps, if the resolution is good enough here, that the silvery part of this lava lake in the daytime is up against the rim right up there. And there is a little bit of a gap. That's a small cliff, but that dark rim there considerably thickens, showing the lava lake is dropping during this interval right here. You can see that fuming holes here on this pathway, so the lava is actually probably coming up underneath here and then going around like that into this lake, is how we saw this thing evolve and develop. And it seems like there's not enough pathway out, so it's also popping up and and filling that pond and squeezing out in this direction and squeezing up through here as well. So that is all fairly unsurprising and pretty cool. But when we scroll here to the left and look at this northern part of this image, that's where I think we start seeing some things that maybe we wouldn't have expected. For one, you can see where the lava is oozing out here in this northern section here. This clear as we come in the second day. We're forming a large crack. And so right in here, in the daytime, it was smooth, and the next day as the sun rises, you see the crack is in place there. So it's really showing you that there is some differential down dropping between the stuff on this side of the crack, which is dropping downwards, and the stuff over here, which is actually overflowing onto that former ledge, which is not dropping down. So that's forming the actual crack. But it's really showing you the extent of how much of the crater is sinking down. It's this outer crack, I'll start calling it now, which is all the way to the margin of these blocks, rather than an inner crack, which is also on the screen here. If I let it come around, there's an inner set of cracks that we've been talking about being in the center of that old crust that's more buoyant and has been driving the rise of this crusted over lava lake's surface, right? Rather than oozing out and being covered like it is in the perimeters here, this middle part's been rising as the lava has been filling below it. So interesting to see that part, we have lava thick enough all the way to the edge of this outer crack now, the edge of these most shallow downdrop blocks. And it seems to be pretty solid as far as transmitting that pressure, right? When a lava is moving from there, you're seeing it respond equally across this larger area, not just this inner area, which is an interesting thing I thought to share with you guys here. Otherwise, you can see there's lots of gas coming out. The gas looks normal. We haven't seen anything that different with the gas emissions. It's kind of looks the same. We'll see from the measurements that it actually is measuring pretty close to the same as well. So what's happening is a little bit of a puzzle. We'll untangle it for you guys here. But that's one thing to note here from the KW camera. So here I'm trying to see if I can show you guys some of this, the actual sinking of the crater, which is it's a little bit hard to see in some of these animations, but maybe you can see this crack forming here on the left side and the lava flow starting to ooze out of it right in here, right through there before it runs dark. Otherwise, we can see the actual drop at the lava level more clearly in just this one first afternoon loop right in there. We'll really have to move to some of the other cameras to learn more. You start to see some flows coming up, but the flickering nature of the daytime and nighttime means we'll, as usual, prefer that F1 camera. But to catch us up to what's going on now, let's give this a reload here from the USGS site. And it's not quite dark, but zooming into the most current view, we see the main active lava lake is still active. There seems like the West Pond vent is still, West Vent Pond is still active as well. We see some red right in there. And I can't see much as far as a fume over here on this side, but I don't see much glow or illumination in this southwest quadrant, which I was wondering if we might see the lava keep leaking out from that weak spot for longer, or if we're going to settle down. And it appears that we're actually settling down there, and that flow, we'll see once it gets dark how much of that is still glowing tonight, but perhaps not as much. Perhaps we'll be back to the lava lake as we're used to seeing in recent weeks. All right, so moving on to the F1 camera. Here we have the last half a week, we'll call it, right? From right before the event occurs, which there it is. You can see the flash of color on the screen on the bottom and on the left here, or the lava flows oozing up through this cracked perimeter. You also can see in the main lava lake the lava level dropping. There it is, getting slightly thicker, that purplish band in between the dark and the orange. And you might tell from here that the southeast pit seems to be kind of flickering, and this is something we'll see. It's actually been robbed of much of its supply of lava. The lava has been moving through that little pathway that still exists through there, but as the lava level is lower, that pathway is a lot lower also, so it's not carrying as much lava in. So this is becoming a little bit isolated, and we're seeing it crust over and overturn, and that foundering process, right, where that built up heat underneath the crust causes it to break apart and overturn and cycles and cycles and cycles. And we see it flashing like that. So we'll see that again from all the different angles too. All right, so moving back around, you can kind of see the edge of that inner crack area right in there, and the outer one is mostly off the screen here in that direction there. You can see there was an ooze of flow that occurred the day before, but really that seems like there was normal activity, and otherwise there was not any real indication of change before that happened. So there you see how that occurs. And so let's see, I think I actually have it clipped one more time, just the collapse part here, so we can focus just on that moment, right? And so one thing to notice is that there was all kinds of things happening all at the same time or in close sequence together here as this event's unfolding. From what I can tell from these webcam images, one of the first things that happens is a lava level starts dropping within the active lake. And according to the USGS, it's dropped in total 33 feet, 10 meters or so, and has since recovered 2 meters or 6 feet of it. So, but we're talking about that actual event dropping down 33 feet. So maybe it doesn't reach that full extent before the actual crater floor starts to sag downwards. And I'm using the word sag because the center is what's going down, and we've just shown you that some of the edges are not, especially those northern parts over here. And then we see, coincident with that, the lava level dropping, earthquake swarm beginning. The earthquake swarm has about, well, let's call them over 80 earthquakes, the largest magnitude 2.9. I believe I counted 19 above magnitude 2 of that sequence, and they're all about a mile down underneath this lava lake, almost directly below it. We'll look at that more closely as well. So the earthquakes go off. We have the tilt coming in. The tilt actually spikes in a big inflationary jump and then stabilizes, and at the same time we see the cracking of the perimeter of the crater, as you see down here in this right corner, and the lava flows oozing out from that area, right? So interesting because we're noting, you see pretty clearly in this area, in this crack right in here. I wonder if I can zoom into that a little more. Right, is that we're really seeing the response of this crust sagging down in the middle. It's almost impacting the lava below there and squishing it up out the cracks on the sides there, right? That's really interesting to see that happening. So really fascinating. So it's actually more of a collapse than anything. I know the USGS in their update noted that it was a likely blockage, but we'll look at that more closely as well. And note that just from here, you can start to see that we've actually had a net loss of lava. So that lava didn't replace itself up on a surface within this pit in this lava lake. Rather, it must have gone somewhere else. And so that leads us to the possibility of considering whether there was an intrusion that actually happened with this as well, underground. And I think we'll hear more about that from USGS in the future, but it has not been mentioned yet. So the current F1 view, here it is. Actually, this is a little earlier today. Let me reload it. But earlier, you can still see some hot spots around the perimeter from those ooze up flows. They're still active now. And considerable brightness from that west vent pond right in there, and lava level is still down. And what's interesting now as it's getting dark, you can maybe see there's a little cluster of pixels right in there that's separated from that main pit. And it turns out that as the lava level dropped through this little conduit, a piece of this bridge actually fell in, a pothole, so to speak, in honor of our discussion earlier and the Hawaii Tracker colleagues here. So we'll look at that as well, that little double archway that's formed that connects these two lava lakes. That's pretty cool. But for now, it's all still as it was before. It was almost like a little pulse. So, all right, we're going to move on to the V1 camera. And this doesn't look like the V1 camera because it was actually moved and reframed. And Dane kindly clipped this little sequence for us. And so we have not a whole lot of frames here, but you actually can see a wider angle view. We normally are zoomed into the V1 lava lake, something like that. And so now we have a much wider angle. We're seeing the ooze up flows here in that southwest part of the crater floor, as well as northeast all the way to the northwest once it pans around here. Right, and there's that outer crack that I've been referring to, forming right in there. And earlier, you see the inner crack right in here. And really can see that separation from this angle pretty well as well. And otherwise, this is reframed once the lava level has already begun to drop. So you really just see the lava level already looking low with the crater walls exposed here. So that is fascinating. Some extra bonus views here this week. Well, keeping it moving, here's our regular view of the V1. There is just that closed-in frame, and once again, I've clipped it to just the moment right after the little collapse happens. So at the start of the loop, we have lava level up higher, not quite to the very rim up in here, but closer and much more silvery before it becomes dark at nighttime here. And if I zoom it in, let's look at this archway here. There is that southeast pit, and here's our pathway, right? And maybe you can tell there's that one, oh, the camera moves, and besides the regular challenges you actually have with the wind and the tripod and the temperature and all those things, if the actual volcano is doing this kind of thing and wiggling around, imagine it could also shift your tripod a little bit too. So hard to tell exactly if any one of these jolts was that, but it does jolt around a little bit when you're zoomed in this much. And in any case, hopefully you can see these two different bridges with a little gap in between. When it's nighttime, you see the lava glow come through there. When it's daytime, you see the sunlight actually shine through there and illuminate this little lava channel below. Pretty fascinating. I don't know if we've noted that double archway before. And one thing you can note is we have this kind of, let's see if I can pause it here somewhere that you can see it. We have this lava veneer that covers much of this crater wall all through here. And you see it's got this rim where it showed a stable depth before it dropped down. It was probably right in here. And it dropped down and it's forming another ledge down in here. But so this is actually forming I call it a veneer because it's sticking against all the crumbly side of the wall. And sometimes, like, you actually see right to the left here, this is just north of that first archway closest to the main pond, this much rougher area texture right in here, right? So it appears that as the lava level drops, you do have some of these areas where the lava that's stuck to the wall does crumble down, and you have kind of collapse features right through there. So some of these things on the margins of the lava lake and these features like these archways may not last just because the lava is supporting them as it's moving through and going through there. Even if it's liquid and moving, it's still exerting a force, and it has a certain mass and all of that. So when it drops away, then you can have parts of it unsupported and collapsing and forming these kind of features. And that's another cool thing to note, to look which areas you might see some of these collapses occurring. And you may still see more of them further in the next few days because of this shift in the lava level. Although the lava level is coming back up, it's still lower than before, and you might see there's almost these little slivers of land in here that might be prone to collapse at some point or another, depending on how supported they are from below here. So pretty cool there from a V1. Otherwise, we'll show you different views from the viewing area, that highlights from our last stream that Dane mentioned here at the start of our sharing session with you guys. Let's move it on from the V1 camera time lapse to the more recent view. There it was earlier today, and let me reload it and see what our view looks. It's just getting dark there. And we're seeing a little bit of spattering spots on the margins of the crater, just like before. It's just happening at a lower level with more of this cliff exposed behind it here on the side there. And we used to see more of it in this area when lava was essentially funneling, draining down through that hole right there. Zoom it in a little bit, you see that double archway right there. But since there's not as much going through there, you may not see as much spattering in this area right through there. Possibly over here, we know this is an area where there's a sink, a area for it to get back down, and also still in this northeast embayment, as it has been referred to recently by the USGS. So that's current V1. We're almost through our webcams. This is the S1 camera for the last week. I've also clipped it a little bit so we can save a little time. And you can see from this angle, the lava level has dropped. There's our pit that's flashing with its resurfacing, and the ooze flows in the back crack, outer crack all through there. And then the southwest sector of the west vent complex where this lava flow was most active. This largest flow was most active for several days following that event on Tuesday. And so it just seems to be shutting off now, and we're waiting for the camera to show us whether there's anything left in there or what the extent of it may actually be. All right, that's the S1 and the current view of the S1. Let's reload it here. There it is. So everything appearing normal from this angle. We certainly do not see anything active here on that corner anymore. So seemingly just like a little pulse, a little spike, a little flurry of activity, if you will. I see some questions coming through about the why, what might happen if this, if that. So we'll look at that shortly. But to kind of finish off the visual part of it first here, as far as what was actually seen, let's look at the B1 camera. This is that one that's from the direction of the viewing area. So obviously it's sped up, and it would have been hard to see incrementally the crater floor actually sagging like you see it in this clip here. But we've sped it up so you can see that more easily, and most of that ooze up flow is happening on the far end of the crater over here, but zoomed in you can see quite a lot. We'll show you guys that from the highlights from the Two Pineapple stream. There is an outer crack way over there. And likewise, from this angle, which is looking from the east, so now north is in that direction, we have that inner crack with a discoloration and several of these hornitos, and they all just ride downwards, even the large ones in the center. And if I may focus here into the foreground, let's see if I can, you'll actually see there's this crack opening up right down in there that you can then see begins to glow. So lava's underneath the whole crust. You can see it's pulling all the way, forming an outer crack, even all the way here on the eastern side. And in this case, it just opened up the glow, but in the other areas in the northwest, where it seems like the crust maybe is acting more like a piston. You know, the lava source is underneath this southwestern side, right? That's where it first broke out in that original fissure that's feeding the west vent complex and all that. So it's way over there. So it makes sense that that's the area that has the most freedom of movement, both upwards and downwards. And that's probably where it moved down the most and all the way outwards, and so probably squeezed up closer to there on that western side because of that. But you can still see it's cracking and sagging all the way to the east, all the way over here, except for this very, very bottom edge against the crater wall right here. All right, that's B1 this past week. Here's B1 earlier today, and let's reload it for a current view. And there it is, looking much as before. You still see those cracks in the foreground right in here, but it doesn't look like lava's coming out of them even at this point. It seems like, if anything, everything's happy underneath there, and there's not a whole lot of ooze ups that we can see right now. All right, so that is mostly the visuals, but since this is the angle that we look at the viewing from, let's switch now to looking at the lava viewing, just to tie up what we were able to see of this event. And to remind you guys, here is a map of the summit. We're going to show you highlights from Kupinaʻipali over here in the east, Waldron Ledge, as formerly known. Different view than you got from Devastation Trail and Kanakakoi area, where you could see different angles and different parts of the eruption and collapse and ooze flows. And likewise, Uēkahuna over here in the north could see different things as well, although most of the activity being in the west and the southwest, it wasn't the best angle that I could tell, although I'm sure there was still fantastic photography, and I'm meant to look for some of that, but running a little short on time here today. So I imagine some great views from there as well, but maybe not quite the direct views of the expanse of lava that you could see from the other directions. So we were watching the After Dark in the park at the Kilauea Visitor Center right in there, and then walked across the street, past the Volcano House, a half mile to the overlook, and from there is where we had our viewing. And we had that joint stream, and here are some highlights of that, and I have sped this up a little bit just so we can move through. And from this angle, while I was there on a spot, I was thinking that this feature here in the middle might be that central island, and this might be some spattering occurring on that eastern side of it. But looking at it again with this framing, which was a little bit hard to see in the dark last night, it appears that this might be the actual West Pond vent glow over here. So we're zoomed in closer than I thought. This is that southwestern area breakout from the edge of the southwest of that west vent cone complex right through there. And this is the actual main lava lake itself, right? And that what looked like that island behind it was actually that extra tall crater wall because the lava level had dropped so much. So that said, we'll look at this and zoom into the areas as we progress through the highlights here. And you can see some flashing. I see there's a still movement and spattering occurring there as the lava is still circulating, maybe at a slower rate, but when it's sped up, you can see that clear movement from that west to east still occurring. And similar, there's movement up here on that big flow emerging from that west vent complex. And it's actually going from the complex and moving to the south and east from there. And he zoomed in and sped up onto that southern edge of that persistent lava lake. That's where that spattering is happening. And over here, maybe where we're actually seeing more of that connection to that southeast pit and that double archway, and maybe as it's draining and activating, it's spattering a little bit through there too. And we're not sure how deep that goes and how much underground that pathway still exists. So that's something to look at as far as the bubbling for a hint. So, and one interesting thing is that we don't see a whole lot in this sequence from this southeast embayment over here, but towards the end of our stay, we do see a couple of big puffs of gas come up out of that area. So it does seem to appear that the lava did reestablish that pathway, right? In this particular video, it looks like it's actually mostly moving over here to the southeast, but there is one big puff of gas, and here comes another one. Seems like after that, you can see the lava is returning in that area of a return area back to underneath the crust. Maybe was experiencing some changes at the time. So a lot you can see from the viewing area, and that's just one quick highlight. You guys can go back to the stream from Tuesday on Two Pineapples to get the full extended version of the viewing there. There was a little bit on ours as well, but they have a little bit longer. So check them out. And as usual, if you're going for eruption viewing in National Park, check the National Park website. Current alerts, enclosures, conditions, links to the webcam, map of the locations, what you can see in daytime and nighttime, what to bring, how far the walk is, all those kind of things. So fantastic website. Easily found from the main homepage from the National Park, Hawaii Volcanoes National Park website. So check that out. All right, so I still see questions coming through about all of these dynamics questions and things like that, but we will switch to the monitoring by way of looking at the hazards first. Right? If you're up for viewing, here is let's give it a reload. I don't see any circle for the gas extent. Okay, so it's giving us a big circle, but everything's still in the green. Maybe you can see that. Let's zoom it in for you guys. There, everything is still in the green, and it is showing possibility of the summit area being affected by the VOG, since the winds are not strong enough, essentially. We're seeing 4 miles an hour from the east only there. So everything looks in the clear for now, but you can see, zooming in here, Kahuku in the southwest is showing orange, so there could still be some effects going on over there. Although with this wind, perhaps it's still some of the VOG from earlier or some other source that's picking up there. All right, so that's the map. Let's see what the charts show us here. And in the green, most everywhere except SO2 at Kahuku, which is something to keep an eye on. So that's a strange thing to be seen over there, right? All right. This is the VOG mapping project, VOG forecast. And it looks like it's actually not current, so let's reload that. There is a current one, all right. So we had a puff of VOG coming here to the north and overnight, and tomorrow perhaps this is why that low winds, shifting winds, is showing that park possibly being under slightly more VOG impact tonight. That's the SO2. If we switch it to the SO4, which includes particulates, then it'll freeze on me. All right, come on. Try it again here. Right, SO2, SO4, there we go. So you can see that as other areas, including that upper slopes in the Kona side, that are getting persistent impact as well. And so if the VOG is wrapping around, which it often does, and getting stuck here on the side, then maybe it's picking up on the Kahuku area as well. So let's move on from this, which is not cooperating with the browser today for whatever reason. And we will go to the purple air monitors. And you can see that we're still in the green, but we do have these areas that are hitting the yellows still. So let's see if I can get this to... Here we go. Show us the graph where you see 3 times in the last 48 hours or so, the particulate threshold has been exceeded into the yellow here. So still a concern. It's an ongoing concern. This part of it might get old or repetitive, but for people who have to live with it, it's an ongoing thing, and we don't want to forget about those people, since there is an impact, and it is this. And thankfully, it's not a lava impact to anyone, but there is still an impact, and it is this fog, which can make breathing difficult, can make farming difficult, depending on other weather factors. So we'll keep mentioning it here. But since there is so much other activity happening today, we will keep the train moving here, and full on go into the monitoring. And we'll start with these USGS updates. The first update was put out on Tuesday, 7:05 p.m. Hawaiian time, after 4 hours after activity ramped up. And so we'll recap here what the details are that they note. So increased seismicity, ground formation, and surface lava flows at Kilauea summit within Hawaii Volcanoes National Park occurred between 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. Hawaiian Standard Time today, September 20th. All activity was restricted to the summit region, and there was no indication of activity migrating into either rift zone. Yeah, just note that. No indication of activity migrating into either rift zone. Beginning at 3 p.m., earthquake activity beneath Kilauea Volcano summit began to increase, followed by summit inflation beginning around 4:20 p.m. So you see the inflation was delayed, not quite an hour and a half, but almost. New breakouts of lava began occurring on Halemaʻumaʻu crater floor at 4:30 p.m. So that's the third thing. After that, the tilt, then we have the breakout of lava at 4:30 p.m. So the initial assessment, this activity likely represented a temporary blockage in eruption of lava at Halemaʻumaʻu, causing pressurization below the surface. This resulted in the earthquakes and ground inflation. Once the blockage was cleared, eruption of lava resumed, with new breakouts occurring on the Halemaʻumaʻu crater floor. So that was the fast assessment. When I first assessed it, I was thinking similar kind of thing, right? I couldn't even tell from the overlook what I was looking at, the right thing here. But on review, there are some signs that point towards an intrusion that we'll revisit this and look for what the USGS says here in the future. But following from that first update, continuing, 50 earthquakes were detected in that first 3 hours. That's going to rise to 80 earthquakes over the first maybe 6 or 8 hours or so. And largest of those earthquakes, 2.9, as I mentioned earlier, with the majority being less than magnitude 2. Right? So maybe 19, 1/4-ish of them above magnitude 2, and most of them below that, 3/4 below that. So here they note the rapid inflation of the summit began around 4:20 p.m., coincident with a drop of 23 feet, 7 meters in the lava lake level. That was the initial assessment 3 hours in. But ultimately, they're going to note this is going to rise to 10 meters, 33 feet on the next update here. They do note new surface breakouts of lava occurred in the west and north margins of the crater floor, and approximately 12 microradians of inflationary ground tilt was measured on the Uēkahuna instrument over the following hour. Only minor ground formations have been recorded at Kilauea summit since approximately 5:30 p.m., and earthquake activities returned to near background levels as of 6 p.m. That was the first update. That initial one, the following morning, not quite a little more than 12 hours later, another update comes out, and so let's just highlight the changes here. Next sense of breakouts. All activity remains confined to the crater floor of Halemaʻumaʻu, with no significant changes in areas outside of the summit. Here they note extensive breakouts have occurred along those areas, and these breakouts coincided with a drop in the crater floor in an active part of the lava lake. Right, so, and then a little more details through here, 10 meters, 33 feet. And other parts of the crater floor dropped by several meters or several yards, right? So we didn't get an exact number, but other parts of the crater, not where the active lava was in the lake circulating, but the other crusted over part, not an exact number, but several yards, several meters. Then we have the old measurements noted. They note here in some observations the summit tilt of 12 microradians at Uēkahuna. They note 1.5 microradians at Sand Hill, which is a much smaller amount, and looking around, really that was the most we found, and our original assessment that was localized to Uēkahuna still holds true based on what you see here, and has remained flat since. And now they note more than 80 earthquakes from 3 p.m. to 6 p.m. Most of the earthquakes in the square crater approximately 1 mile, 1.5 kilometers beneath Halemaʻumaʻu, largest 2.9, and all that. They did measure SO2 just before this happened on that day, and it was measured at 1,055 tons per day. So on the low end still, but still within a normal range, 1,000 tons per day. Noteworthy, the next day it was measured again yesterday, and it came out just below this, still in that same range, and that's going to be part of our puzzle to unravel here. But just to make sure we cover the update here, no unusual activity noted on the East Rift Zone or Southwest Rift Zone. Low rates of ground formation and seismicity continue along both, and everything else below detection. So that's the highlight from the Wednesday update. There was an update today as well. Right, we're getting daily updates still. Mahalo to the USGS HVO as always for all the data they're putting out here, written updates, webcams that we're taking and repurposing and animating for you guys to highlight the most interesting stuff. All the tilt meters, GPS, seismic data, all of it is all put out by the USGS, so mahalo. So today, any changes noted here? The active part of the lava lake has risen approximately 2 meters, 6 feet since it fell by 10 meters on September 20th. And that is what we have that's new, apart from tilt meter has been flat and SO2 rates at 930 tons per day on the 21st. Otherwise, same, no change in the rift zones, and that is the text update there. So there's a lot of stuff to unpack here. I was going to start like this because this doesn't really fit in anywhere else that easily. But here's our most recent eruption map, and as always, we're looking at these statistics that come in here at the bottom. So I wanted to note that we are most recently at 886 meters above sea level. This was on the 12th, so a week before all this happened, but let's just call it close enough as our pre-collapse elevation, right? And, not really collapse, a sagging maybe, right? Because it was only a few meters, few yards, right? Even though in the actual open pit, it dropped 30 feet, 10 meters. Really, it was a little sagging of a few meters, few yards. So we'll sag a few meters, few yards from 886, perhaps. And, and where we are right now is 29 billion gallons, 111-ish million cubic meters. So if we look at the maps that go back to August 18th, so on the 18th, bear with me here, it was at 880 meters above sea level. And I'm going to advance here to the map from August 8th, right, where it was at 879 meters above sea level, right? So we actually have two maps back to back here recently with a 1 meter difference. And we can see that we have here 27.1 billion gallons, and it was 27.4 billion gallons with 1 meter higher, right? So we have 1/3 of a billion gallons per meter or yard, more or less, that this thing is rising up, right? So it should follow that if we have several yards, several meters of sagging in the middle there, right? What's several? Well, I'm working with 1/3 of a billion gallons here. I'm going to call it 3. Let's call it 3-ish, just for a rough guess of how many yards that crater dropped in the middle. And if that's the case, then we've lost about 1 billion gallons of our most recent 29.2 billion gallons or so. So that amounts to somewhere in a range of 3 to 4% of the lava that has accumulated since the 29th, right? And that's a much smaller percentage if you include the stuff that we had in that previous 5 months of eruption and filling of the crater as well, right? Which was another 41 million cubic meters. So that probably drops it down to like a 2% of the whole volume that actually leaked out, or that was lost, right? That we now have a lower surface, that volume is missing from inside of there. So that's just one thing to consider, that we maybe have had like a somewhere in a range of 2 to 4%, we'll call it, right? Of depending on how you're counting it, of loss of the volume of lava in that pit, in here, this pit right here. And we'll have to wait, and hopefully the GeoGist has had a chance to fly and rescan this thing to see what new volumes we can get, and see if there was volume lost, figure out where it might actually have gone. This would be a great time to get some INSAR, because if the magma went somewhere else, where did it go? Did it go straight down somewhere right below there? Did it go off to the sides? So let's dig into the details of the monitoring data and see what we can extract from that. So first, we have the 1 week summit lava depth, and you see these small variations we saw before, and then here's our main event, the lava level dropping way down. And you can see that it's really been rising fairly quickly since then. That's the encouraging sign of the eruption continuing, much as before, that the pathway is still open, lava still coming in. It's basically just recovering still from what occurred here earlier this week. So that's the lake depth over the last week, and you can see a similar mirrored pattern in a tilt. But here's the tilt. We had these smaller deflation events, and it was dropping down. This is that deflation that we were seeing that similar pattern last week during our update that we discussed as occurring, that deflation and contraction, which is what the context is for what we see happening now. Following the deflation, following the contraction of the summit, is we have this event. So there it is, the dropping and tilt and the rising of it. And interestingly, after it came up, you see similar little variations, like almost little deflation cycles through here, but the overall level hasn't changed. So we have an offset, right? The ground was down here, it moved up here, and it stayed moved. It didn't rock back or bounce back or fall back or in any way get back to where it was before. It stayed where it got put, where it got pushed or shoved, or whatever actually happened in detail there. So that's the 1 week. Let's look at the 1 month, and then let's break off on the context of these tilt signals. But here's the last month, and in that context, there's that signal here within the last week. After that long rise, we have the data blown out by the gas interference with the laser measurement that occurs once in a while. So really, it's just down here that matters. And they're mirroring that is that 1 month summit tilt plot, and likewise you can see the deflation inflation cycles all through there. And here you really can see what we were talking about last week, from where we had this tilt signal seemingly on a downward trend, right? And we said that usually happens when not as much magma is getting into that upper region of the volcano. And so that's where you might consider that there's a blockage or some restriction, some narrowing, or something was happening to change there, right? To cause this to not keep swelling like it was before. Something had to cause that to change. And then following that, here we have this big step upwards, right, in actual displacement. While we're looking at the 1 month plot, let's look at the SO2, because this is interesting. You can see earlier in the month we had this variation in plot and range of the data, all the way from above 2,000 tons per day to down in a 1,000, 1,200 range. And our measurements we just mentioned, both of them on the 20th and the 21st here, both on this low end on either side of this 1,000 tons per day marker. I like lining these up because we can see here, this first plot corresponds to the early part of the day here, and the second one actually corresponds to farther up after the tilt offset has occurred, right? So that's really interesting. Because one thing you can consider is if a new batch of magma is coming into the volcano, right? Let's get a little bit more to what's going on and how and why exactly. If a new batch of magma is coming in and pushing everything upwards, then you expect it to have more gas and be gas rich as well, right? And so the fact that we're not seeing that, and we have had no indication from USGS of that, maybe it happened and we're just getting around to it, but no indication of that, would lead you to believe that we actually are having a reworking of the system internally rather than something from below coming and pushing its way through and disrupting everything, right? So it doesn't seem necessarily like it's a new batch of magma coming up and causing a big gas burst. That doesn't seem to be what happened there, right? So now for some context, let me look at some other tilt plots. So I thought I'd pull up here. This is November of 2020. This precedes the beginning of this summit eruption in December 2020. And this was, in this case, an intrusion, right? So we actually had here, this is a summit signal in the blue. At the time, the green signal from the rift zone was still working on this plot. So just ignore it though and focus on the blue as before. We had this deflation-inflation cycle happening before that eruption occurred. And then actually the first thing that occurred was this big offset upwards where it moved and stayed displaced and continued doing deflation-inflation pattern up here above, right, at this higher level. So that was an intrusion that occurred in advance, 3 weeks in advance of the original event opening up December 2020. And if you look at this capture, which is now showing 2 months of data after that eruption began, there is that inflation signal right there that corresponds to the intrusion. And then it was 3 weeks later that we had the beginning of the eruption, and as lava burst out, that pressure then dropped, and that's why you often see deflation occur when eruptions are occurring. So when we say there's a new vent or a new a release from below and lava is coming up onto the surface and out, you expect to see the outside tipping back in, kind of sagging in also, right? But we're not seeing that. We saw a pattern more like an intrusion than we saw a pattern like an eruption, actually, right? So advancing to the second phase of this eruption, beginning not quite a year ago, or 1 week short, but here is September of, this is 2021, so this is last year, right? And in that case, here's our Uēkahuna plot, tilt plot in blue, and I'll zoom it in here. You see we actually had some wiggle. We had a big increase in the tilt, but it was followed by a big decrease as well. So in this case, maybe you had a pressurization occurring. The pressurization caused the ground to start blowing outwards, but once it was relieved, once again, the eruption causes the deflation of the volcano, the tilt to sag back inwards, right? So we did not see that here as well. But in fact, before the last eruption, we had an intrusion as well, so we can pull that one up. And here it is. This is what that August of 2021 intrusion, which was a little further southwest of the center of the lava lake than current activity. And this is now the Sand Hill tilt plot because these intrusions can be localized. They only show up on a certain station or show up the most on a station that they're closest to. So in this case, the intrusion was slightly further away and it's showing up on a slightly different instrument. Here is a Sand Hill instrument. And we're now showing blue and green as two different components of the same, two different tilt directions. These are azimuth compass directions here, right? So looking at, for example, the green here, you see that we had an offset coming upwards and then stabilize, and we actually had a second pulse of intrusion in that case, so that was a two-stage event that occurred. And so that was August 2021, and then followed, that would happen off the edge of the plot here to the left. Then we had a slow building, and then we had another pulse, and then it actually dropped down, right? So that is interesting that we're having this potentially intrusionary signal going along. And if you think about it, it actually makes sense that if you have an intrusion occurring down underneath the lava lake somewhere, that you have an opening occurring and magma and lava is going in there, you could actually bring some lava from the surface back down into that area. So it seems like something popped open, got forced open by the pressure underground, most likely. That caused probably lava from down there to inject as well, but there was enough space created or enough adjustment occurring that's able to drain that surface lava or surface magma chamber, depending how we're calling it, and we've talked about that before, but able to mobilize it back in and inject and join a party as well, right? So that potentially 1 billion gallons or 4.5 million cubic meters of lava from that surface joined in below and added to whatever is below, that gives you the ballpark of, previous intrusions we've had in the range of few million cubic meters to 10 or slightly more, but usually below that. So we're still right in that ballpark. And in that context of all these signals, what we have here on our current signal is looking like it moved, and maybe something's still to follow. Maybe we'll, what could happen next? We can get into that a little bit and kind of just hop back and forth a little bit here. But it could be that this is once again opening salvo of a longer sequence, and maybe we do see another vent open up in the summit region up here, and it puts out lava because it's not getting out efficiently anymore from where it has been, right? That's a possibility. Or, maybe it just is able to pressurize and create intrusions, and it keeps stepping upwards over time, upwards, and just keeps going upwards, and that's how it keeps deforming. It changes the style of how it's swelling the volcano, but it's able to activate more of this popping and shooting mechanism, but still doing, in the grand scheme of things, about the same thing it's been doing recently, just in a slightly different mechanics of it, right? So interesting to consider all of that. And for reference, in case you're wondering, this is 2018. 2018, I haven't showed you all the scales here, but we're looking at 0, and the upper part is 500 or minus 400. It's almost 1,000 microradians here. In 2018, we had prior to the eruption, a pressurization of lava, overflow of lava from the summit and Pu'u'o. That's this part right here. Right, and after that happened, it didn't stabilize, but it was followed by draining and collapse. And that's what this big drop here actually is, right? So several hundred, many hundreds of microradians, 600-ish right there. And in comparison, the Sand Hill intrusion prior to the last episode here, you can see it was in a range of, it kind of depends how close the station is to the intrusion, like what the scale actually is, of course, but in a ballpark of looks like 50-ish maybe, right? 50 microradians, 40 to 50, 2 pulses of that. The one that occurred just prior to the eruption almost a year ago, that one was similarly maybe 8 or 10 microradians, more like what we saw more recently. And that intrusion prior to the beginning, that was also in the range of 20 microradians or so before that big drop that occurred of 50 at the beginning of the eruption here. So I know it's a lot of detail we're stepping through here, but you guys have lots of questions of what's going on, and we'll refer back to this as far as we figure out what's going on here. So there it is, and there is that plot on the tilt. So we will finish off the monitoring here. First, we'll just look at this year-long plot of lava depth, just so you guys can have the context of what's going on here. So if I zoom in way in, this little drop right here on the right, that's the little blip we just had. We've had in the past deflation-inflation events that have dropped the lava level by similar amounts, right? So that range of lava level drop within the active lake isn't surprising in itself. It's more that everything else did it as well, right? And that's why we're treating this as a different kind of pattern, even though it looks similar here on the right to what we saw in the past here and here. So, but just to show the overall gain of depth of lava has still been hugely positive, and then just at the very end recently, just a slight little blip for the first time downwards in this whole eruption here. So coming up to what we talked about last week, this is a GPS. First up top is the summit, and we noted how we started seeing this contraction of the summit occurring a few weeks ago, right? And you see it's going from an upward trend to downwards, and looks like we're missing some data here at the very, very right, and maybe we're flattening, but now we're getting into the really hand waving and out on a limb area, because these things can move around, right? But it did appear that, as we described, that the summit was not spreading apart anymore. And that could also be what you consider a blockage occurring. So the blockage might have been occurring back in here, developing earlier, weeks ago, and evolving from a wider spread context to the tilt context, eventually leading to this event, whether it was whether it involved an intrusion as well or not, right? So there's that contraction there. It'll be interesting to see if this actually spreads it back apart, goes back upwards, since we saw the tilt jump in that direction. It wouldn't be surprising to see that as well, but we'll have to wait to see what recovers there. GPS data is notoriously difficult to use in a very short term, because it's this averaged measurement that comes through here, right? So looking at the 1 year at Pu'o'o, you can see still contraction going down, no real change going on there, right? So this is, as we described last week, there was no lava coming up in the rift zone by Pu'o'o or in a summit as much, right? It was neither place, and likely building up pressure in the ground, we can now come to understand. All right, so that's the GPS that we have here. Let me show a little more GPS because I want to show you how this really is localized. So here are these are now 2-year plots. So, and once again, east, north, and up, all components of the same station. But this is Uēkahuna, where we see the most signal. And a change, in this case, does not appear to have been bouncing back. It does look like the north. This is the north component here, right? That was getting pushed from the south by the lava lake direction, getting pushed away from the lava lake. Stopped getting pushed away in the last few weeks here, and does not quite look to have recovered. But at the same time, it's being pushed upwards, right? It was moving up before, but it's hard to tell what the rate is, if it's higher or lower here, but it's still getting pushed upwards and at least the same as before, right through there. So almost like it can't push out anymore, but it's able to push up still, right? And on the east component, it's not pushing it to the west as much, not pushing west or north, but more pushing a little bit up. Uēkahuna, Byron's Ledge, that's over on the east. You see it also has some interesting, hard to tell on this very right-hand side of the plots as usual, our usual caveats, right? But it looks like it could be slightly different, stabilizing there as well. Not moving as much to the north or to the east, and also moving a little more convincingly, more steeply up right here. Crater rim sees the same pattern. You see here the north stops moving. The up is not as dramatic, but you do see it there as well. And here at the southwest outlet, you see it a little bit as well too. Those are the most convincing sites, are these ones around the summit. To kind of finish off the monitoring here, we can look through the rift zone. You see not anything convincing. A little bit of noise more at like Mauna Loa, Kananoiohamo, Kamoamoa, but you see more action in the south flank closer to the summit. So areas like Ahua, where maybe it stops moving to the south as much as well either, and might be moving slightly up as well too. So overall, all this is showing pressurization around the summit area, maybe spreading outwards to those upper areas of that upper east rift connector, upper southwest rift connector, all those areas like that are summit, generally speaking, and causing them to kind of lift as it was pressurizing here in the last few weeks. So to really convince you of that, let's see, what can I show you here?
Wait, before you go, quick question.
Let me finish it off. At the lower east rift zone here at Jonica, which is the most important thing, here is where we're seeing a contraction of it, right? So like that's where you don't see signals. To kind of just finish off the point, Dane, I'm sorry. That's the contrast and why we say it's localized to the summit. Okay, give me your question.
Yeah, so we saw in the cross caldera distance between Uēkahuna and Crater Rim, the main GPS that's shown on USGS's page, missing some data points, but it doesn't appear that the individual stations are missing those data points.
Right.
Is that your interpretation, that they both have those 2 data points, those 2 days, that the other one's missing? We don't know why that one doesn't have it.
That does appear to be the case. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm not sure what's going on with the processing there, or sorry.
We've seen that before, where the cross caldera distance, it's like an extra extrapolation layer of data presentation, and we've seen it fail, but these other things remain online for short periods of time, type of thing. But and then they fill in the data later, right? It's not like that data is lost. They go back and correct it, but that's not new. That type of error.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. All
right.
So there could have been some of the processes that calculate this stuff automatically may have gotten disrupted for some reason. A lot of these systems are not very robust, we'll say, right? And little changes can trigger changes. Yeah. So some, I was trying to look at like the rapid GPS as well, like from not even through the USGS, and similar like that was having issues updating in the last few days as well.
The University of Reno GPS stations
with a whole other data source than the USGS. So like there might be something happening with like the error of the satellite orbit or something. I mean, who knows? It could be something like that that's not allowing it to calculate automatically. There's some catch that it's something happened there. that they have someone's got to go in and adjust or improve the data or filter the data or something along those lines. And I don't know the details of that. Just some ideas of what might be possible there.
Yep.
So yeah, that's the monitoring here. Besides the earthquakes, I can maybe go into the earthquakes and we can do all the questions about all this together. And then before we switch to the other stuff, what do you think, Dane? Or should we do some of the questions now?
I mean, I think we might want to offload some of the questions because they're starting to stack up.
Okay.
But first, I want to recognize we had 2 super chats come through. Longtime supporters, these ones. First one was Gary Bryant, who came through and said, "Great prep and presentation as usual. Thanks, Dane and Phil." Thank you, Gary, for the continued support there. And we also had a $50 super chat from Chris Kiki, who says, "Thank you, Dane and Phil. Appreciate the support there." We also are brought to you by the County of Hawaii through the Vivi grant. They have kindly gone out and supported a year worth of content to continue this production and this type of content. We really appreciate them going out on the, something a little bit different, but there's a lot of things that are different in Hawaii Island than the rest of the world. We disaster a lot, so we have some unique things, and we really appreciate them going out and doing this. So with that, I think we have a couple questions here. Where to start? So we'll start with one of the first ones I saw from Bo Diddley, who says, "Would the weight of that drop have caused the massive ooze-ups? Like that, the weight of that cap, that crusted cap that's on it?" Yeah,
I think that I think it's likely. That it seems like it's coincident. You see the drop happening coincident with that ooze up around a perimeter, right? And we haven't got to the earthquakes quite yet, but we did hear the USGS say that the earthquakes were one of the first things that occurs starting around 3 p.m. So it seems like the earthquakes and lava lake drop start kind of together. So that would lead you to believe that something broke down lower, was allowing lava to move into it and propagate through, causing more earthquakes. That easiest path to respond, the lava lake itself drains down, then the crust sags, then the outer rim cracks, and then the ooze-ups come up. So because that is a sequence, I agree that likely it was the actual sagging of the crust itself that impacted and squeezed up the lava on the outside there. And it actually, not only there, but you actually see that West Vent Pond, I can't say it, that West Vent Pond actually flash opened. It was the very first thing. So it's almost like as the lava level is draining down right in the active lake, immediately it's starting to cause convection or these upwellings to occur where it flashes up under the vent immediately. And then later it starts coming up and oozing out the cracks on the sides, right? So it's very interesting how it all went in sequence there. But yes, I would agree with that question, that assessment.
All right. Dude asks, what's your thoughts on the tilt increasing 12 microradians and maintaining that level, if not continuing to increase it even now? Why hasn't the GPS, and then the GPS points we addressed already,
right? And
the updating of
the
12 micro jump and staying up.
Well, I addressed that with the intrusion possibility there, right? I mean, essentially what it means is the ground moved and the stayed moved. And one way you do that is through intrusion, right? You could also have, if it's like some giant block, because the reason through intrusion is because that block can get pushed by lava, injecting it, like wedging itself in a crack, and it essentially is wedging and pushing something over. So then it's going to stay pushed over because the crack is still full of lava, right? Unlike an earthquake that might wiggle it one way and then wiggle it back, right? So that's one possibility that seems likely, since we know there's a whole bunch of lava and magma down there, right? If anything's opening up with earthquakes, that seems likely. But you could consider that maybe that there's some big gravitational shit. I think got just pushed, and maybe it's like just pivoted and how it's sitting. Maybe that could be another way, and it's just tilted and stayed tilted over to the side. If that was the case, it could rock or move back or something like that during some other event, or be prone to collapse, possibly even if it's that loose and wiggly. Maybe that could be the case. But most of these blocks are long slivers downwards, right? So they have like a point way down on the bottom, and that's what's getting affected. And we haven't looked at the earthquakes yet, but we've mentioned that they're down a mile beneath the lava lake. So it's not even near that bottom of the old pit. It's way down below all of that in the upper strata of the volcano itself that was all underneath all the rubble before all this came back into activity. So I think probably it's something like an intrusion, but it's an offset regardless, and that's what that means. And yeah, I'm curious, and I don't know. We'll see what happens if we'll see another vent opening up, or if like the vent that we already have actually puts out more lava. It does seem that for the lava to actually drain down, that instantly there has to be a fairly open connection into the lava lake. We've discussed this in the past. In the past, the lava levels would respond to deflation and inflation events with a lag, and then they stopped having a lag, and we said, okay, we've transitioned from having a semi-open to a more open pathway, and that would jive with the actual lake draining down and feed something that was happening a mile down, if that's the case.
So Kenny asked, the big question is, why did the collapse happen? What's the, I guess that's the mystery, right, that we've been trying to address, or you've been trying to address.
Yeah. So what makes sense is, like if you put lava in some crack and wedge it in there somewhere, it's going to take some amount of lava, even if it's like not that big a wedge. If you consider that it might be like a half mile long or something, like it adds up, and the height and width of it. So that lava had to come from somewhere. And it's true that it could have been building up pressure underground. We talked about how the whole area is kind of swelling and bulging, so there was pressure down below. And to kind of throw another question in here, the question that I have, right, is have we passed some threshold where there's enough stuff piled up above it that allows you to have more of this pressurization overcome the barriers that still exist down below, right? Because there's still a lot of post-collapse junk down there, we'll call it, rubble and stuff that hasn't been necessarily reclaimed, by the magma system. So it could be some of that as well.
Mm-hmm.
But
we had the
tilt increases because of the lava actually pushing it, and the collapse happens because of the lava going somewhere else to cause the tilt to increase. So that makes sense, and as long as you have that fairly open connection where it's basically almost instant or very, very low delay.
We do have a question. Do you think this drastic change in tilt could possibly be instrumental issue of some kind from the earthquakes, or is this a true reading?
It seems very likely it's a true reading. Everything is consistent. It's like it's not showing up in just one area. It's something we've noted changes for the past few weeks. That something funny was starting to occur. We didn't quite know what was going on, but Kilauea answered that for us this past week, at least as the first part of the answer. We'll see what happens next, right? But no, I don't think it was a faulty instrument at all. They usually look different, and that pattern that we see actually fits what we see of these other events that I've showed you guys, other examples of real things in the past that look very similar. So,
final one. I'm probably going to pronounce this wrong. J. Popish. Isn't this data set what would happen if the crater faulted and got wider? Tilt goes up, but level goes down, both almost instantaneously.
Yeah, if you could, like wedge. I think what Jay Poplish is describing is like so we actually have like this V-shaped crater, right, profile, and it's like a wedge. So if you kind of wedge it open some more, something like that, pack it in more, then you actually would have a similar kind of effect. And yeah, that could be true, but then you'd expect to see the sides be moving in a GPS in a slightly different manner, rather than they're not moving laterally much at all. They're kind of just moving up and down, and that's kind of why that combined with the fact that earthquakes are happening a mile down and not at the surface. There are some surface earthquakes that occurred that you expect that to occur as the surface settles as well, but most of them were down a mile down. And that combination with the up and down motion leads me to believe it injected down a mile down somewhere right there, rather than on the actual surface that it's wedged into a current, if that makes sense. I think that's what you're asking. And we've had a similar question many times before, like, can the weight of the lava in the crater cause it to collapse? And this is the closest to yes we actually have gotten, right? It actually, the weight or the mass of all that buildup on the crater maybe allows it to pressurize more underground to actually force its way into somewhere else underground. And so not exactly collapse it. Once that seal is broken, then it can drain and collapse slightly, right? We're talking about this 2 to 3, 4% amount, not a huge amount by any means. Just like a little bit squirted down in a way, and most of it's still up here and will resume its previous activity most likely.
All right. Yeah, I think that gets most of the questions for now. We will do another round a little bit later, but we'll if you got any more, get them in chat and we'll get them queued up and we will continue on.
Okay, yeah, so what we'll look at next to inform our discussion is the earthquakes. And let me get them on the screen here. Okay, recent earthquakes. And so we'll start with the plots as we usually do, just to show you what it looks like. And in this case, because we have, oh, scroll it back down. Okay, in this case, because we have earthquakes per week as our plot for our 1 year. Oh my, well, computer is not responding. Here we go. Earthquakes per week on this axis. That means we have a big bucket, and we actually have reached normal amounts in half the time, but it looks on this graph as if it's just normal, and you don't really see a whole lot of change on this 1 year earthquakes per week plot. We're really going to come down to this 1 month earthquake plot, and earthquakes per day is what we'll look at. And then we see that we had that one extra high activity day, and then slightly higher the second day, but really back down to almost nothing now on the current day. So the peak was over 100 earthquakes in this whole area, right? We talked about 80 over the summit region. So here's the map. There's most of those 80 occurring right through here. Pahala cluster still active. That's probably a large part of the rest of them. We still have some south flank adjustments occurring, with two interesting, these were magnitude 3.2 earthquakes that occurred in intermediate depths under the south flank all through here. So there's an area of adjustment between a summit. The summit kind of wants to move as it expands, right? And the rift zones are through here, and the south flank wants to move. So this is an interesting zone just outward of this bend where we see this adjustment of the south flank. And so it's having some adjustment as well. In which way this will impact the dynamics was yet to be seen, but we'll note this for the future. We'll probably see some effect later. Really, we're going to have to focus into right through here, right? So what we'll do today is we'll switch over to the Iris earthquake browser. And I've preloaded the earthquakes into here. So here's our map, and some of these labels I can't get off of here, but here's a histogram showing on the 20th, right? The increase of earthquakes. There's really like one happens early, another early, and then really ramps up and ramps down. It was really peaking in those first few hours, as you just said. And so let me push the play button and animate this for you guys. And so see if I can get them to show up. So here we go. Here comes our flurry of activity. There it is. And let's see if I can possibly get that zoomed in. So, okay, so it's kind of hard to see maybe, but let's see, I have this over here. Let's do this. Let me add this little video clip that will let me zoom in, I think. Come on, video clip. There it is. Yeah, so there is the earthquakes. And while locations are still preliminary, and you see that likely there's some error and adjustments will occur here, you can certainly see that they're clustering naturally. There's this cluster that's occurring just south of Halemaʻumaʻu. There's one that's occurring just underneath that west vent area, right below it, right there, that southwest corner of Halemaʻumaʻu. And there's other cloud that's occurring in the northern part, and it kind of extends below the down drop block over here to the north and a little bit to the east right through here as well, right? So let me play this again. You guys can see how they come up. First, right underneath the west vent, then on the north, and ending in the south here. You see how they all pop off together, and that was a sequence of earthquakes there. Right, so that's from this Iris earthquake browser and this animation, and there's some other cool things you can see here. So we can come down here. I'm going to click on the earthquake stats. So if you're curious, here is the distribution. There were about 25% between magnitude 0 and 1, 54% between 1 and 2, and 21% between 2 and 3. Of those 80, that include a couple extra on the outside there, but that's the distribution of them there. So that's why let's talk about this a little bit more, right? I mean, if this is the only zone and we're seeing earthquakes. We're not seeing earthquakes in the Upper East Rift or in a Southwest Rift or anywhere else. And every other previous intrusive episode that we've considered has had earthquakes right around where the magma is injecting, right? Even if it was, I want to say, 3 intrusions ago in 2015, a little bit further over in this direction, but the earthquakes always cluster where the lava is likely going. So we talked about this conduit up and down, so you maybe can say that these earthquakes are a response of the magma up and down through there, right? Maybe that's that first draining sequence, the lava flushing through and pressurizing that lower area to drive the intrusions. And you might consider, and this may not be exactly where it is because of this error in locations, right? But maybe somewhere over here you have the magma injecting in this direction underground a mile, like a little extra flap or a little wing off in that direction, and another one later on over in this direction here, right? So let's play it one more time. And there's that down dropping, and then you see it kind of almost overlapping the north and the south there, but all the activity is happening right up here, all within the summit caldera, in fact, even with this little bit of error, and even closer than that underneath this Halemaʻumaʻu area in particular. So that's why it's all likely here, and the depths of a mile is why I favor the interpretation that we've shared here earlier. All right, so that's earthquakes on Kilauea, which is this whole area over here. We talked about Pahala. Pahala is still ongoing. There it is with 2 clusters and really fairly normal activity. We still are having offshore, settling earthquakes elsewhere around the island, like these ones here, 2.2 and 2.5 at over 20 kilometers depth on the eastern flank of Mauna Kea here. Mauna Loa is still showing earthquakes at its summit, this northwest quadrant that it often has, but also down its flank over here and its east especially. And we are seeing over here in the west, there's a 2.7 that's deeper down, 2.9 deeper down. Oh, this one is 2.8 deeper down, and 2.4. These are all more of the settling deeper earthquakes, right? Not so much flank movement visible there. So that's starting to transition us into the Mauna Loa part of the update here. So I will just pivot into that. Unless there are more questions we want to address here on Kilauea, Dan, if we want to throw them in now, we can. Otherwise, I'll do Mauna Loa and some more pictures, some more Kilauea. We have Samoa to talk about still, and on from there.
Really not many questions coming through right now. There is one if you want to take it. Can you estimate how many megatons of TNT all those earthquakes add up to?
Not without getting the calculator out, I can't. Sorry.
Yeah.
That was not one of the things I prepped today, but I can look into the TNT earthquake energy release for next week.
I'm sure there's somebody made a calculator somewhere at some point.
It probably is. I probably could find it if I searched here, but I don't want to get us too far off.
Yeah, exactly.
It's yeah, lots of small earthquakes can add up in energy for sure, right?
Yeah,
and
the cumulative release of energy.
Right. Yeah, and in fact, that's what when we look at these earthquake plots, like this one right over here, right? When we look at this red line, let me put this back on the screen here. When we look at this red line, this is energy release. When you have a high magnitude earthquake that's releasing more energy, that's what the red line is actually measuring here. So you might not have as many earthquakes, but you have one big one at way more energy, and then way more energy. And in this case, over here, lots of small earthquakes, but you can see the energy released was not nearly the same as even one larger magnitude for something like that. Right, so didn't quite add up all the way there. And the best insight I can offer at this point.
What
we got on screen
right
here.
And that will, we're just doing questions on Kilauea right now, so we'll take Mauna Loa and Samoa questions in a little bit. But yeah, that kind of does it for me on that end.
All right, so let me get to Mauna Loa then, because we're talking earthquakes, and that usually transitions us here. So Mauna Loa summary, and starting with the earthquakes again. Here's our earthquake graph for the past month. So you can see actually here in earthquakes per day, we are still in this range of not quite 40, which is elevated beyond what we've seen before. Here's what's the background, the rest of the month. And really over this last week, you can see we've elevated a little bit above that. And you can see the red line here, once again, is actually picking up some of these larger events that are building up the energy that's being released here, right? So this is as important in this case but it also mirrors this peak in the blue that you see. And we'll keep it moving here so you can see the map of what it looks like over the last week. Here's the summit region over the last week. Still in that underneath the caldera and upper southwest rift area. That quadrant to the northwest. And it's looking denser than we've seen it in some other weeks. So, activity is picking up slowly but surely. It's still not to any alarming levels or anything like that, but we are seeing it trend upwards here. Right, here's the map for the last month. So very similar. You can see it's just basically a larger number of events in those same areas. So looking at the plots for those, here is the past year on Mauna Loa. So we're back to earthquakes per week. And you can see that we're at this higher level that follows the events this past summer, right? The extra activity this past summer. So still trending upwards, higher than the recent background the rest of the year, but similar to what we've seen before that, right? Maybe if it keeps this up, it might actually be trending a little higher than this, but at present it's still not to any alarming levels, right? So to put that in context, here's the last 5 years. And here in the last 5-year plot, we're building up, but we're not even reaching the levels that we saw back in spring of 2021. Okay, so that's the last 5 years. Here is the GPS on Mauna Loa. And we're still waiting for more clarity, but the pattern seems to be similar. This is just the summit. Let's scroll up here. Here's that summit caldera area right there, and we're looking at this distance north or south across it, right? Now remember that Mauna Loa is thought to have a smaller magma reservoir somewhere in an area over here, but it's really got a big blade of lava that runs underneath this whole area that's beyond the extent of the caldera. So it could be that the volcano is still filling with lava, but it's not filling directly under here, but it's filling more into these areas, right, as part of the summit complex. And then you sometimes see these areas actually contract and come closer together. That's something we've noted before, and something that if we look at the distance going across the summit, and GPS here is still appearing to trend downwards a little bit, and that could be what's going on there, is that it's just moving elsewhere since we're seeing earthquakes elsewhere as well. And likewise, the vertical motion here, well, actually the vertical motion is still going up, so that would kind of help you. That would make sense if that's the case. It's still getting pushed up and out, and the sagging is just the top parts tilting in a little bit. Sometimes you do see this go down as well, and you really can't say much unless it's changing a lot more than we're seeing here, right? So, for example, back in spring 2021, it dipped down that little amount there, and here you can see, once again, larger excursions occurring that were non-eruptive still, and so we're within a range of what normally happens in this volcano, and seeing it move and seeing it slowly but surely build up towards whatever it's going to do next, but still not doing anything very quickly or very alarming. Really, the story this week has been show has been robbed by Kilauea. So just note Mauna Loa here, 190 earthquakes noted in this week's report, and in these same shallow depths, low deformation, and nothing else is noted changed here on Mauna Loa. Okay, we do have some extra imagery for Mauna Loa. So we'll transition from Mauna Loa into our media for the week here, but starting with a September 8th set of photographs from Sulphur Cone Multi-Gas Station Maintenance. So this is really cool. This is the multi-gas station up on the southwest rift of Mauna Loa at an elevation of 11,240 feet above sea level. That's 3,430 meters above sea level. And this is a place that has a lot of discoloration in the ground from venting of sulfurous gases. You see lots of elemental sulfur and discoloration, oxidation of the lava rock itself, iron in it most likely. And you can see here that this gas monitoring site is measuring volcanic gases such as sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, carbon dioxide, and water vapor, as well as fumarole temperature, and meteorological parameters, things like wind direction and things like that. All right, so monitoring the ratio of different emitted gases may provide information on restless behavior and eruptive status at Mauna Loa. So really cool to see that. You can see all the different gear here, right? The instrument boxes, receivers, radio transmitter to transmit the signal back towards the national park and the data infrastructure down there. You see the cone here in the background, sulfur cone, and other features that we are going to be lucky to see here since USGS has shared. So this is a zoomed out view. There is a cone. There is the station right there, right? And you see this large surface crack. That's the surface expression of the southwest rift zone, along with all these features, all these different cones you see. Right? They're all indications this is where lava's burst through the ground here in this upper southwest rift zone of Mauna Loa. So you can see that they see here that they're noting on September 8th, they replaced the gas measurement station at sulfur cone on the southwest rift zone. Field staff are in orange and gas monitoring site visible right in there. This shows this fissure is the 1950 fissure and sulfur cone. So the 1950 fissure is this crack that has all this deposits of gas on it up here. So next image of the sulfur cone itself. It was blanketed by sulfur crystals when it was named in 1921. A subsequent visit noted that molten sulfur had flowed down the flank of the cinder and spatter cone. The remnants of that yellow flow can be seen here on the flank of the cone. Heating along the fissures of the voluminous 1950 eruption of Mauna Loa may have melted the accumulated sulfur around the cone, creating molten flows. For more information, see an old Volcano Watch article. So there is that we can link or share. Copy that here. And drop it to you. In case you want to share that, I'm probably not going to throw that in today, but keep going on these images. Here's a multi-gas on the inside of the station. You can see all the tubes and wires coming through. Everything telemetered back to HVO where they can view it remotely. Here's a view of the thermocouple housed within plastic tubing to protect it from the harsh environment. Thermocouple measures temperature and is inserted into a nearby fumarole, an area emitting gases, to detect subsurface changes in temperature. So this is likely right near the station, looking right down here, and there is that plastic tubing with a thermocouple inside of it, and then it goes all the way down and goes into the crack over there. And I believe next we get a view of an HVO scientist peering into the 1950 fissure. There it is, lots of, looks like water vapor mostly still coming out, but likely some sulfur in there as well, given all the deposits here on the side. But you never know if how old this stuff actually is. You know, this is an area that could sometimes be more sulfurous, sometimes more steamy, and so given how unconcerned a scientist looks in no gas mask, probably more steamy in this day. And there you see the actual sulfur flow on the side of the cone here. So here's a caption. Hawaii residents may find this photo reminiscent of the Halemaʻumaʻu sulfur banks area of Hawaii Volcanoes National Park, though the photo was taken high up in a southwest rift zone of Mauna Loa, in an area known as Sulfur Cone, at an elevation of 3430 meters, 240 feet above sea level. There are bright yellow crystalline sulfur deposits present. Image by Tamar Elias. And I believe we have one last one here. Sulfur features northeast of Sulfur Cone at that elevation. See a little closer the texture of the sulfur crystals on the rock there. Right, and it's a little different since it was actually an area that flowed, which is pretty weird. So that concludes the Mauna Loa images here this week, and we will keep looking at images, but we'll shift back to Kilauea first. So that was our Mauna Loa media of the week, and we did our thank you already. Let's go to our media of the week, and I thought I'd start off by throwing in our own B1 image that we put together for you guys last week, right? And just showing the rise of the crater floor like in the daytime from B1. And then I just tacked on the end here the actual sagging that occurred from that same view here. So we talked about how this actually was just that little few percent of down dropping, but I thought I'd give you guys a little visual update here of what that looked like in the long term and the greater context of this. I'll play it one more time. Mostly rising, mostly rising, mostly rising. And at the very end, sagging down there. Okay, moving back to Kilauea. We have... what's going on here? We have these series of... This is where we're supposed to be. Series of images released from before this big pulse and collapse, sagging, intrusion, inflation, earthquakes, all that. Before all that, back on the 15th, we had geologists visiting their normal field viewing sites and giving us updates and photographs. So here is the morning of September 15th, and interesting to note here, they can pull up right in their car to make measurements right here. And this was a site that they saw at the end of Crater Rim Drive. So there it is, the end of the road, some cracks. You see some pieces of other road down here, further down in the image, and then down there below you see that crusted lava lake with all the fume coming out, and here's that main lava lake surface right here and that way over there. All right, we'll move on to the next image we have. They're looking more head on to that fuming crusted lava lake, that main active persistent area visible in the foreground right through here. But really, even at that point in time, telling you that the whole thing is hot underneath, right? The whole thing's steaming all across, and the sagging we've seen recently confirming that. Let's see what our caption says here. So it was 7 a.m. And yeah, this is something I wanted to highlight. HVO geologists heard the west vent softly puffing and an insistent, high-pitched hissing from the steaming northeastern embayment of the active lava pond at Halemaʻumaʻu. A deeper-toned hiss occasionally joined in from somewhere on the eastern side of the lake. Big, shiny, silvery plates of cooled crust flowed slowly across the surface of the active pond towards the eastern edge, where small splashes against the rim showed the hot, glowing lava below. A photo by J. Schmith. So I love this description. This is awesome. I just had someone asking me in the last couple of days, like, what about the sounds this thing is making? How can you hear them? Where can you hear them from? And a lot of it depends on the distance, depends on the wind direction, what you can hear or not. So it's awesome to hear this report from the geologist right up close and describing this hissing sound, right? Hissing, insistent, high-pitched hissing from that steaming northeast embayment. That's the area that lava was recycling back down, where we saw those two puffs of gas come up a few days later as the whole event unfolded. So there is noteworthy. And then one last view here, they're zooming through the viewfinder, looking at the west vent complex itself, noting some extra layer of tephra spatter deposited, showing that this thing has been spattering and actually like leaving a layer of this cinder spatter stuff that's coating lava flows. But they note that they did not witness any spattering while they were there on their own, but they saw that the vent was still feeding lava to the active pond through the crusted over inlet. Right, and that's the inlet we just saw overflow. So in hindsight, all this was normal before, and we're just catching it up here. So one last piece of media is this USGS release from September 8th of the lava within that lava lake before it did any draining, and focusing in on that northeastern embayment sink, and where the lava is recycled back, is draining back down, but the gas that's floating, that's kind of trapped in the lava a little bit, because the lava is kind of sticky, it's kind of like a honey sort of thing, right? The bubbles can get out of there, but they have to get worked together and coalesce and then actually be able to push their way out of there. So as the lava tries to go down, those bubbles regather and they start bubbling back up, and that causes all that undulation of the lava lake surface here in the corner, and likely causes that hissing in this area, and possibly hissing happening elsewhere in that other downdropped area too. So this video is pretty long. We fast forward here to get another little section. Here's that area that leads to the southeast pit through that submerged now double archway. It was likely over here, and then this is the other side, that southern side of that pond that we've seen persistent spatter as well. So cool to note that. It's similar to our lava viewing videos we've seen from Two Pineapples, just different angle, really, different camera, taken from that western side from the USGS. And we appreciate these different views. Cool to see all the different angles. Note the activity, how it looks, and compare. So pretty cool. Advance it a little more. There is a sink on that northeast side again, and maybe I'll play it some more if we have some discussion here further on. But that's good enough for now. Since we are trending along as usual here, so much has been happening. We can transition from our media to looking at Ta'u and Samoa. So Ta'u and Samoa summary. Things are trending downwards. Basically, the earthquakes are still winding down. But we have some updates on the USGS website, as we've been told to expect, and so we'll see those here. First, we'll look at the usual earthquake feed. This thing doesn't like to be preloaded, so we'll have to wait for it to reload again. Coming off Raspberry Shake, one of those first instruments that was installed there in American Samoa. And you see there's some hard to tell with how this thing is actually scaled here, but I see some areas that have a little bit more vibration, and then other areas that like here and here and here, and other areas all looking for the same. Doesn't look that unusual to me. There might be some tremor, but that little bit of tremor could easily be like ocean noise or something like that. So without knowing more about this, it's on its own not alarming. But there are better ways to look at the data now, and that's what we'll look at now, is improvements to the website from USGS. So if you click through to Ta'u Island from the main HVO website, you can now get this, right? You actually have this map coming up, and we're not actually getting earthquakes plotted on the map itself, but they have these new symbols, little triangles and little stars. So I can click on a triangle here, and the Tau seismometer, and click on it and click through, and here is our 24-hour heliquarter plot. A much cleaner look here, showing the background for that station TAU. And so that's pretty cool, and likely you're having, it's an island, right? So you always get some kind of ocean signal creeping in. There's one over here on Ofu, so we can look at that one as well. And similar, you see little wiggles, and occasionally you see some other little something going on. But even these are, if their earthquakes are very, very small or distant, or just something more nearby. As we know in Hawaii, people walking by, cars driving by, aircraft flying by, all those things can leave signals on the seismograph too. So really nothing alarming here. There's another seismograph underneath that star right over there, but to get to it, let's go over here to the filters and go to instruments, and let's turn off the stars, which are GPS. We'll get to that shortly, but let's just click on this final one, FAGA, and there it is. There's its seismic data. It's heliquarter plot as well. Go past 24 hours. Cool to see that data online there. There it is. Let me come back and turn on a GPS, and we can look at TAU number 2 and GPS station. Here's GPS for 1 month, and as before with our 3-component plots, this is east on the top, north in the middle, and up. And our scale is meters, 1 centimeter, 2 centimeters, or 1, 2, 3 in the other direction here. So you're seeing some good variation through here, and it's not quite clear if they're still calibrating or what other effects are going on, but we're basically still have to establish a baseline of what the data actually is. Since we actually are seeing the earthquakes decrease, this may give us a long-term baseline, so that if something does occur again, if it picks back up, if it goes to a second stage or something, we might see what changes occur from now this installation. So we'll have to wait to see what's going on with the actual data itself, but today we're highlighting the fact that data is there, available online. Here's a second GPS station, Tau 1, similarly, there it is, coming online, looks like on the 7th of the month, and having those as well, right? So that one is trending down with some lateral movement, and that one, there's one point way down there, but otherwise flattish, not a whole lot of movement. It's a very initial survey here. There's nothing really you can say more. It's just beyond noting what we're seeing here. All right, so that's most of it for Ta'u. We can go to the USGS images once again, and we can see that there is photos of Tutu'ila seismic station installation here. So this was back on, it says the 14th, but could have been before that. And USGS scientists installs a seismic station on Tutu'ila Island in American Samoa, joining several other stations recently installed in the Manua Islands to monitor activity. So pretty cool. There it is. And I think we have a couple more. We have some more images of coastal tuff cones. These are obviously fascinating to geologists, especially Hawaiian geologists who don't see them as much on Hawaii Island, especially, right? But these are areas where you have hot magma interacting with either shallow groundwater or seawater. And so that's what really causes that kind of tuff cone, and then it later gets eroded by the ocean itself. So on our island, one of the closest equivalents might be like Kapoho crater, right? The actual cinder cone that is close to sea level and likely had some interaction with sea level at some point as that lowest, most east rift zone erupted hundreds and hundreds of years ago. But that's something for another day. That whole story. This is just relating Samoa to Hawaii for our Hawaiian viewers here. One more view of that tuff cone over here, right? And you can see there's, look closely, there's a road that leads up and around the corner through the jungle there, and panning across, you see other tuff formations here, and then coming across there is the beach and harbor and town over here to the left. So pretty cool to get those visual updates. However, really the activity is winding down. We'll probably wind it down a little bit too, depending on what's going on here. Let me get the most recent set of updates for Ta'u Island from HVO here. And I will start with yesterday's, which says, the earthquake swarm related to Ta'u Island has continued at decreased rates over the past 2 weeks. The position of the earthquake source has not changed. Beginning tomorrow, Thursday, September 22nd, HVO will issue weekly updates for Ta'u Island instead of daily updates. Additional messages will be issued if needed. No earthquakes reported over the past 24 hours, no satellite data either. The National Earthquake Information Center, NEIC, will soon start publishing preliminary locations of the largest earthquakes that have occurred during this period of seismic unrest. These locations will appear as dots on a map visible on an earthquake map, and people can report how they felt at the Did You Feel It earthquakes page as well. So this is not online quite yet that I saw earlier today. I can click it and see. Let's give it a shot. See if it comes up. Don't see any of those earthquakes popping up yet. Maybe if we make sure we have the right parameters. Let's do all magnitudes 7 days. Make it look pretty. And no earthquakes. So not quite yet. We'll see them pop up at some point, but not yet. But that is what we'll expect for next week. However, because they're best estimates with large uncertainties, the dot is an indication an earthquake occurred, but does not provide a precise location, right? So there'll be some greater uncertainty in those dots than usual. So analysis of the earthquakes in the swarm so far suggests that they occur north of Ta'u Island, and the source of the earthquakes has not moved over time. However, due to processing challenges, some preliminary earthquake locations may appear south of Ta'u Island on an NEIC map. The locations will be further changed with refined analysis of the events. Okay, so they're telling us in advance they're going to go in and fix the data. The earthquakes may actually move locations or change sizes. That's all part of the plan. right? At least we'll start seeing some of that coming up in the future here. So that was yesterday's, and that gives us the kind of context for really the first of the weekly updates. HVO weekly update issued today for Ta'u Island. And I won't read everything, but I'll just highlight the little changes here. Position hasn't changed. 3 earthquakes reported felt over the past week, with magnitudes similar to larger earthquakes earlier in a swarm. Satellite data, no change. NEIC recap, as I just noted here. And otherwise, weekly updates on Thursdays until further notice. That wraps up Ta'u for us here. There is a couple final things for us to do. One being Volcano Watch this week. There's a lot to share for you guys this week. Let me finish stepping through it here. Volcano Watch this week is related to flow prediction. Where is that lava headed, and when will it get there? So, when lava flows break out on the flanks of Kilauea or Mauna Loa, Hawaii residents and emergency management agencies want to know what to expect. Highly accurate forecasts for other disasters such as hurricanes, flooding, drought, and even the spread of fog from Kilauea are now commonplace. Can we do the same for lava flows? This is written by postdoc researcher David Hyman for USGS HVO. Mahalo. They're recapping 2018, right? The actual impact of that, the fog and all of that. So, the most successful forecasting efforts for other hazards rely on the ability to simulate flows of water or air. Even though the motions of these fluids are typically more complex than lava, we know a great deal more about water and air than lava as material. After all, we can't see inside a lava flow to observe what is happening below the surface the way we can for water and air. At the heart of the hazards forecast are computer algorithms crunching the numbers as fast as possible to make a relevant forecast. After all, a prediction of severe flooding in 24 hours is not very useful if it takes 23 hours to make the forecast. Although researchers have been applying the principles of fluid dynamics to lava flows for more than 40 years, most simulations are too slow to use during a crisis when we really want to know the answers to the questions, where's lava headed and when will it get there? To help answer that question, they've used lines of steepest descent for a long time that work pretty well. However, that doesn't really tell you when will it get there. It's only predicting the route, not the speed or the flow's final length. Thus, to help answer these questions, USGS scientists are developing a new lava flow forecasting model based upon a physics-based simulation of lava flows as it flows across fluid topography while cooling and solidifying. This model is designed with simplified but realistic physics, enabling simulation of a 24 hours of lava in advance in as little as a couple minutes on an ordinary laptop. So they're supported by the additional disaster relief funding. The model is only as good as the inputs and, of course, the modeling itself, right? Dane will have a chance to share his view of models here shortly. But you can see here that what they're trying to do is run the code many times with a range of inputs and use the whole collection or ensemble of all the models to give you an idea of the range of possible outcomes, right? That's how you can use models to be useful, right? Not sticking to any one individual output, but looking at the whole range, looking at the range of inputs and all those kind of things. So this is common practice for forecasting hazardous weather like hurricanes for many years, when you see all the different paths and that kind of thing, and is now the cutting edge in volcanic hazard research. HVO scientists are investigating how to produce ensembles using this new model with the goal of successfully forecasting lava inundation in future eruptions. So that's basically it. They're working on it. Here is an example image recreating a flow from Fissure 22 during a 2018 eruption. You can see this aerial photograph from Google Earth. The area that's actually black is the actual flow that occurred there, right? There's the actual flow there, and with a little gap in the middle right through there. And you can see, obviously there's another branch that went this way, but there was more than one fissure, of course, and that complicates things. But what you see here is these different colored lines that are like the contours of where the flow advances over time, right? So it's telling you from earlier and this more magenta to mid-range of the time frame and the blues, and eventually getting to this green, yellow, and red towards the end of this projected time frame. So pretty cool. We'll look forward to seeing that in the future. Obviously, you can see that it's not exactly an exact perfect match, But useful to tell you, like, this would have predicted an ocean entry over here, and the ocean entry was over here. It took a slightly different path, slightly different spread and coverage, but it's a step in the right direction there. So that is Volcano Watch this week, and they are once again reminding us to join us next week for 2 programs about the 1-year anniversary of the volcano. September 27th, that's Tuesday at 7 p.m. After Dark in a Park presentation. So please go to the national park and attend if you can. If you cannot, we will be collaborating with Two Pineapples once again to stream you guys that meeting. And likewise on Thursday, there is a meeting, actually an outdoor talk on the edge of the crater at Uēkahuna, 3 p.m. by a National Park Ranger and HVO scientist. So we will try to bring that to you guys as well. We'll work on those logistics to figure that out for you guys. But that is what's coming up next week, and that really is what's going to wrap up our output here today, is just wrapping up Community Corner for September International Park. Right, we've discussed the walk into the past with Dr. Jagger. That's supported by KDEN, Kilauea Drama and Entertainment Network. And one more of those coming up on the 30th at 10 a.m. and noon. There's Stewardship on a Summit, also on the 30th, 8:45 in the morning, if you didn't go and help pull some invasive plants before that talk with Dr. Jagger. We've had a couple of talks that are come and gone now, but we do have upcoming this Saturday, the 24th, 8:45 a.m. to noon, is another volunteer opportunity for helping remove native plants, invasive plants, remove non-native plants, invasive plants from the national park here. So coinciding with Fee-Free Day all day on Saturday, National Public Lands Day there. Not just in the national park here at the summit of Kilauea, but all the different park facilities in Kona and elsewhere as well. And then here we are, there's 2 events. Eruption Anniversary on Tuesday, that talk with Deputy Scientist in Charge David Phillips, and the Year on the Edge with NPS and USGS on Thursday at 3 p.m. at Uēkahuna at the triangulation marker east of the parking lot is where that is going to occur. Right, there's also still events happening at Kahuku and other ranger-led walks, but we'll cut it off at that here now. And Dane, I've been talking for a long time. I'm just shy of 2 hours here. What do we got to wrap it up here?
Yeah, just thinking a little bit about the modeling thing. It's always important to make progress on that type of thing. Just because the old models, I remember in university, guys working on models, and I saw some after 2018. I saw some software engineering presentations that were supposed to be the volcano models, and they were incredibly crude, and you wouldn't dare think about actually using them in a disaster, right? The one thing I would be thinking of is, immediately when they show that, how the flow progression, you're going to be averaging out a bunch of different runs. It's like, all right, great. What parameters are you working with, right? That's really where it comes down to. It's like, because the thing about the eruption that we saw in 2018, it's the stop and starts, right? You start to figure out, like, all right, we know the flow rate. We know the distal tip is advancing at this rate. And then something changes, and now you're back to square one, and you're back to, like, all right, what is it now? What is it moving on now? And it's using the previous flow that it just created as a guide that changes its steepest descent lines. And it's like, that's where things get crazy, right? Yeah. It's not like it plinkoing down you start a fountain at the top of Mauna Loa, and it plinkoing down is hard to calculate. It's really not that bad. Like, the steepest descent lines are pretty much good enough for that. But what happens if it stops and then starts again in the same area? That's where it gets incredibly complicated, because then it can easily jump off of the steepest descent line it was on, go on a new one, and all the forecasts are just gone, like, out the window immediately.
Update your DM every day, right? Your digital data, your elevations every day, or you gotta account for that and all that. So that's interesting. Yeah, and they're trying to. They said they added cooling, so maybe we can have a chance to ask the USGS more directly for more details on that at some point in time. But cooling rate, you'd imagine if you have, if that's in there, if you have a flat enough area, they are going to predict it to stall. And then does the model keep going, or do they reset it and use new topography, or can they actually do a stop start? Right.
There's other things like that, might be less relevant on, say, Mauna Loa near the summit region than they would be in Puna. I mean, one of the things they talk about in there is the reaction to water and air. Like, that's great to be able to calculate for that and adjust and stuff like that. But the elephant in the room to me is biomass, right? You have all this thick jungle, and then there's a road running through it. So things along those lines, right?
Yeah.
That real world application of a model, even when it's pretty sound, the model, it gets stress tested very quickly. So yeah, well, I mean, it'll be something to work with, but it won't be one of those definitive, in my opinion, it won't be one of those definitive tools where you're like, oh, well, the model says that it's going here, therefore we're just going to discount everything else. It's like, no, just because the model says that it's not in the range of possibilities doesn't mean it's, it can't happen.
So pretty standard lingo. I've been waiting for you to say it. All models.
Yep. All models are wrong. Some are useful.
Yeah. So could be useful. That's all we can hope for.
Yeah, could be useful. Yep. So yeah, we're coming up on we are over 2 hours now. Appreciate everybody that stuck around this long. We did have a couple more super chats that came through. Want to recognize them real quick. First was a 60 NT super chat from Ying. I believe that is a Taiwan dollar super chat. And the interesting thing, Taiwan just had a couple big earthquakes recently, 6.9 and a 6.5 on the 17th. So yeah, I hope you got through those okay, Ying, and appreciate the support there. We also had HG come through with a $20 super chat. No comment there. Appreciate the support. We did have one final question for you. Bobby asked from Facebook, could there be gas pockets? This is Kilauea we're talking about in the lava lake. Could there be gas pockets between the crust and the magma?
I would say it's probably likely. I imagine there's probably like a zone of almost like a foam, right? Like you have gas rich with like lava bits in between little bubbles, or so yeah, you probably have bigger pockets and smaller pockets, and there's areas that are more gas rich, but they still have lava kind of trying to hold them together, and probably gradation from bigger bubbles and smaller bubbles, so there's probably a whole zone, yeah. And I think of it as all together like almost like a foam, right? That can absorb and transfer some of that pressure back and forth and allow the gases to vent and all that.
Right. Yeah, I definitely could imagine, like, just thinking of other concepts, calling that something like a void, right? Where in a water type situation, you can create these pockets of steam inside the water, right? Yeah. And they're considered voids in some instances, and because it's just less dense than the water. So I can definitely envision something along those lines, especially when you're considering magma and how it like it's compressed gas in a lot of ways, right? And it has all that degassing properties. It's like, yeah, I could easily see gas pockets and bubbles and
yeah, almost certainly. Yeah.
All right. Well, what? Oh yeah, I'll answer this question in chat. Or actually, we'll take the last one. Aaron asks, late question, the NOAA visible infrared weather satellite night image with its Halemaʻumaʻu and Hilo hotspots, but what's the elongated hotspot above Kalapana 2018 leftovers? We'd have to pull that one up.
The NOAA heat map?
Yeah, NOAA visible infrared weather. I'll just Google it real quick and see if it just instantly pops. Oh god. Hawaii. We're gonna go IR. Yeah, I guess IR. Don't exactly see it in IR, so we'll have to. Yeah, I'll have to look into that a little bit more. But thanks everybody for tuning in. Thanks for all the questions. We do this stream normally 5 p.m. Hawaii Standard Times on Thursdays. That's our normal time. If something happens, significantly, we'll go live and talk about that. This thing, when it happened, we were basically already planning to go live like an hour after it happened. So we kind of just talked about it a little bit then. And yeah. But yeah, if something big did happen, we'd definitely go live with that. But unless that does happen next Thursday, 5 p.m. is when you can catch us again.
Tuesday, we'll have that special.
Oh, yeah. Tuesday. You want to talk about that one? the Tuesday special?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it already. Yeah, that's the similar to the talk we just had this past Tuesday, but the USGS will be having another talk, and so that's going to be awesome to hear the USGS present on that, and I'm sure they'll have questions and answers on what just happened this past week also. So that'll be a good chance to touch base with them, and I believe afterwards we will, weather allowing, try to get a view of the crater once again. We can't promise that something crazy will happen that day also, but we'll see. Yep. We'll see what happens, and we'll see what we can do to share those views with the guys a little bit extra too after the talk. So yeah, then back on Thursday on our usual time with more of a science update from our end, right? Which may just be a rehash of what the USGS is saying, since they're doing 1-2 this week.
Right. Yeah. And we do thank Pineapples for the helping us with the stream last week, and look forward to doing more projects in the future.
Yeah, that was awesome, you guys. Mahalo.
All right. Well, we are going on 2 hours and 10 minutes now. You want to wrap it up?
Let's wrap it up.
All right.
So,
well, thank you everybody for tuning in today. We rely on viewers like you. Make sure to like, subscribe, share, all that stuff. I know you hear it in a lot of YouTube videos, but it definitely helps with the algorithm, getting more views, getting it out there to more people that might enjoy this type of content, more realistic, less hype type content. So yeah, if you enjoy this, definitely consider that. Until next week.
Yeah. Mahalo, Dane. Mahalo, everyone. Thank you guys for all your lively discussion, all your contributions. And thanks, Dane, for running the chat. There's a lot of action, a lot of activity, chatter today. I can barely keep up with what's flashing across the screen here. So thanks for taking care of that. Thank you guys. And until next week, we'll see you guys on Tuesday and then on Thursday, however you can catch us. Until then, from HawaiiTracker.com, he's Dane DuPont. I'm Philip Ong. Aloha, everyone.